Hello everyone, I am here to share with you my inquiry project where I conducted a case study analysis on a mother's interpersonal responsibility to her son, the defining of clear expectations, for our COMS 616 course, Communicating Mindfully. So for my inquiry project, I chose to examine the relationship between Peter Malark and his mother, Miss Malark, from the movie The Hunger Games, which was originally a book written by Suzanne Collins. So the Malark family is citizens of District 12, which is the most impoverished district of the 13 districts that make up what is known as Panem. Their family runs a bakery, which this plays an important part in the further developing of my case study. So in conducting my case study analysis on this mother-son relationship, I utilized the principles of interpersonal communication, specifically interpersonal responsibility, and how PETA's mother violates her interpersonal responsibility to support, love, and care for her son due to a lack of clear communication between PETA and his mother and an understanding of expectations. So the two subjects of this mother-son relationship are depicted here, Miss Malark and PETA Malark. So Miss Malark is portrayed to have extremely high expectations for her son and for her family's business as they run their family bakery. She is abrasive in her demeanor, which you can see shown here in the image of her. But this can be directly correlated to the panicked environment of District 12 that has her constantly under pressure and constantly stressed to be able to provide for her family, but also for them to run a successful business that feeds a majority of the community of District 12. PETA is Miss Malark's 16-year-old son, the youngest of 3 sons, and he's extremely sensitive and emotionally vulnerable. And we see those qualities about him in a scene I'm going to reference in the next slide, but also through different qualities throughout the entire film of The Hunger Games. But because of these characteristics of being sensitive and emotionally vulnerable, PETA is perceived to be weak in the eyes of his mother. So the case study analysis I conducted is centered on a particular scene that is shown multiple times throughout the film as a flashback. So this flashback is of Miss Malark physically and verbally abusing PETA after he mistakenly burned the bread at the bakery. I have linked the clip of this film in the comments below this video so you can view it for your reference. But in this flashback, it's clear that PETA just made an honest mistake. He burned the bread at the bakery. The picture here is of him holding that burnt bread. But his mother took to verbal and physical abuse as if what he did was the absolute end of the world. According to the interpersonal communication theory of interpersonal responsibility, the ethics of this particular relationship must be examined in terms of the responsibilities found within the relationship. So the responsibility of a mother, the responsibility of a son, and how those responsibilities fit in with each other. So this flashback reveals how PETA failed to live up to his mother's expectations and supports the finding that he will never feel good enough for her. He made an honest mistake and she took to verbally and physically abusing him. So in his feeling like this, Miss Malark believes PETA to be weak due to his emotional vulnerability and sensitivity to others, which we see from his passing the burnt bread to Katniss instead of throwing it to the pigs behind the bakery. So we see this in the clip of the flashback, but he has a sense of generosity and a duty to serve other people, and his mother sees that as a weakness. But to support these findings, I utilized the research of Mormon and Whitley on the quality of a mother-child relationship and how this can affect the emotional connection between a mother and child, where it's been found that sons experience a higher level of conflict and emotional conflict with their mothers than they do with their fathers. So I thought that was a very interesting point to bring up in this particular situation, as it sees that this entire flashback is driven by emotional conflict. So, the strained relationship between Peta and his mother is the result of both parties not being able to clearly communicate with one another. Within this relationship, there's a lack of dialogic communication ethics on behalf of both parties, as there's no responsive dialogue to the narratives provided by either party, but rather reactive dialogue. And actually, you'll see in the flashback that it appears Peta never really responds to his mother. But his mother is not being responsive to his mistake, but is rather being reactive. So there's also the strenuous environmental stress that impacts Peta and Miss Malark's relationship, and that's provoked by the pressures felt by living in District 12. There's also a lack of understanding by Miss Malark of Peta's personality and his sensitivity, which causes juxtaposition between Miss Malark's expectations for her son and the reality of Peta ever being able to meet those expectations, because they're just unrealistic for his personality and for his characteristics of himself. So my recommendations to help ease the strain on the relationship between Miss Malark and Peta is to begin with their reevaluating the communication methods that they are using with one another. So Peta's mother must begin to communicate with Peta in a less aggressive manner. This solution utilizes the distance theory of interpersonal communication ethics, where the distance theory may help to provide communication boundaries for Miss Malark and Peta. So there's also needs to be increased engagement between both parties that involves an understanding of one another. So interpersonal communication ethics establish a sort of precedent for how someone should go about navigating a relationship between multiple individuals, where each individual within that relationship is treated with respect. But lastly, it's necessary for Peta and his mother to communicate with one another in the presence of a mediator. So a successful approach to any of the recommendations just stated would demonstrate a decrease in the strain on this mother-son relationship and would relieve some of the tension between Peta and his mother. So ideally, Miss Malark would acknowledge what a realistic expectation for Peta is, and she would clearly relay that to Peta and how he might achieve it through the establishment of some kind of clear benchmark or a checklist that he could take into the bakery and understand what his daily tasks are. He won't be overwhelmed by them, and he knows what his mother is expecting of him by the day's end. So there is potential for the recommendations to have adverse effects and possibly further complicating the relationship between Peta and his mother. Complications could arise if neither Peta nor his mother, or even just one party of the relationship, was unwilling to adjust their method of communication with the other. So both Peta and his mother must recognize their communication weaknesses and understand the need for growth in order for their relationship to further develop. But when beginning my research for supporting material for these arguments, I was surprised to see this topic extremely underdeveloped in the research world. So in both parenting relationships, but specifically like the topic of family-owned and operated businesses, and how this can alter a family dynamic. I found little to no research on really either of these topics, but much of the research I did find for relationships between a mother and child were very situational, and were directly correlated to some stage of development. So whether when a child was getting ready to attend school or when they were in their preteen years, but nothing really of the level of a 16-year-old boy's relationship with his mother. And much of the situations and research that I found did not leave room for growth and development of that relationship between a mother and child. So the research was extremely situational and just did not leave room for growth. So evolving research is definitely needed in this area of expertise. But thank you all for listening, and let me know if there are any other Hunger Games fans out there.